recently retired from Riverkeeper after 24 years as patrol boat captain and vice president for advocacy. During that time, he patrolled the Hudson from New York Harbor to Troy, as well as the Mohawk River to Rome and the Upper Hudson to Fort Edward. Before working for Riverkeeper, John was the general manager of Peterson Boatyard in Upper Nyack from 1991 until 2000. As a child, John learned to sail at the Nyack Boat Club. John currently lives at his childhood home in Tarrytown, but he is at least part Rocklander, having lived in Piermont, Nyack, and Upper Nyack at various times. So with that, I'd like to introduce John. The idea here was that we would have informal, educational, and fun conversation with John with his 24 years of monitoring the Hudson River. I don't think anybody knows the Hudson River better than John. And with that, John, if it's okay, we can kind of get started. Everybody grab a cup of coffee, relax, and we're going to have a little entertaining discussion, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so it's getting started, John. How did you get started with your passion for the Hudson River?
Well, kind of accidentally, if I'm going to be honest. I am a boat guy. I spent my whole life working on boats, almost exclusively ocean sailing vessels, and sailing all over the world after learning to sail at Nyack Boat Club. But I was manager of Peterson's Boatyard in Upper Nyack from 1991 to 2000. And in the course of working at Peterson's, we met Riverkeeper because Riverkeeper came in for a new engine. And I took the job offered by Bob Boyle, our founder, to campaign that vessel as hard as possible for the organization. And frankly, I learned, even though I'd grown up on the river and I'd worked next to the river, I did not know the river at all. And so in the course of working for Riverkeeper, I learned what the river needs from us. And that set my path, and that determined the course of the work that I was going to do in my time there.
Okay, I guess you don't get seasick.
No, but I think it's hard. I haven't had people get seasick on the Hudson. The waves just aren't the same as ocean waves.
Boy, I get seasick. I get seasick looking at boats, John. So,
All right. So you're not gonna come out with me.
well, I could probably handle the Hudson, but boy, oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was kind of accidental for me. I learned on the job working for Riverkeeper. I was hired as a boat captain simply. And then as I learned what the river needed, I added layers to my job because I want to help the river.
Oh, great, great. So over the years, what's been the most significant change you've witnessed in the river's health?
Well, it's I could say witnessed. It's also a function of my learning. So when I started, Riverkeeper was still in the mode of going after individual industrial bad guys, mostly. So there was a long history of Riverkeeper identifying a polluter and going after them. We have a staff of lawyers, and we can also use federal and state enforcement where they're willing. But what I've learned, and it's a half bad, half good observation. This is my experience, the days of bad guy industrial polluters is waning because the public is aware, because enforcement and deterrence have had an effect. The change that I have witnessed or learned is that the main threat to the Hudson is us, is our society. And so just a few examples, the Hudson, there are fewer now, but the Hudson had a string of power plants along it, providing electricity to New York City and communities along the Hudson. And those plants were using once through cooling. And so they inhale fish. Indian
Mm.
Point, Indian Point killed 1 billion fish a year. And there were many other plants that were once through cooling. So there's just one example of in our need for electricity, we build plants, we use the low cost alternative of once through cooling. There are alternatives, and we kill fish. Other examples are, I guess I should start with where I feel the hope lies for me, the goal. I believe there has to be a society where communities and cities and humans can live on the shores of a river, and both the river and the communities can live in mutual health, not the current situation where the river subsidizes us. So some communities use river water for drinking. That's a relatively benign use, but countless communities use the river as a discharge point for sewage treatment plants, and that's far from benign. So, as we saw in a few years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers, at the direction of Congress, was asked to do to begin to implement a plan to protect New York Harbor and New York City infrastructure and real estate from Sandy-like flooding. And as you may recall, there was a proposal to build a gigantic tide gate seawall across the mouth of New York Harbor from Sandy Hook to the Rockaways, 5 miles long, using a model of the tide gates in the Netherlands. And that would have been a disaster for the Hudson. So we fought it like madmen, and succeeded. It's gone. But there was an example where, in order to protect human valued assets, the federal government and the state were considering an alternative that was going to destroy the life in the Hudson by interfering with tide flow. So, to summarize, today and moving forward, my appreciation is that our society is the modern day version of the bad boy industrial polluter of the past. It's our job as a society to find a way to live in mutual harmony with the Hudson.
Okay, that's going to take a lot of work and going to take a little time
It's
for
it's
sure.
it's probably an I'm sorry to say an impossible goal, but anything we can do to get farther on that road will benefit the Hudson, which I believe we owe the Hudson. The Hudson is the original inhabitant of the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, agreed. Hey, before I go any further, too, I was neglectful in not saying that if you've got a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat. And when we're done with our conversation here, we're gonna open it up also. So just a FYI there, and apologize for not saying it at the beginning. So, John, in continuing this conversation, what's your biggest issues with contamination? Are PCBs, or what do you think is the biggest issue facing the river?
Um, the PCB fight, as you all know, is ongoing. General Electric released massive amounts of PCBs in the upper Hudson near Fort Edward and Hudson Falls, and that those PCBs have contaminated the entire estuary and upper Hudson. And so, I should just say that, today, if you were with me on the water, if we were lucky enough to be on the water in the upper estuary, um, you'll see signs that say take no fish. It doesn't say eat no fish, it says take no fish. And in the estuary south of Troy, women of childbearing years and children are advised to eat no fish.
Mm.
Men, like myself, older men especially, are less um, valuable to society. And so we can eat some fish, but like a serving a month kind of thing. So that New York State Department of Health advisory saying women of childbearing years should eat no fish and children should eat no fish, that's an incredibly horrible indictment. The Hudson is one of the largest Superfund sites in the United States, thanks to General Electric. So the EPA has been shepherding a remediation over now decades, and it's not done. Um, it's a subject we could talk 45 minutes on alone. The message I would like to communicate is that interested persons should communicate in the comment periods to the EPA and say, finish the job. Finish the job. It'll never be PCB free, but the goal would be to get the flesh of fish uncontaminated enough, clean enough for consumption. And it's not just our consumption, it's the entire food web of the coast that is eating PCB laden fish. So that's a huge problem. I believe, however, that you don't catch a case of PCBs if you go swimming. You only really accumulate a dangerous level of PCBs by ingesting PCB laden fish. I believe that the real issue now, as I mentioned in your earlier question, the real issue now is to start to reduce the cumulative impacts of our sewer plant waste stream. And we'll undoubtedly come back to that. But I believe that is the biggest problem that we can actually fix at a local level. That solution is in our hands. PCBs is somewhat out of our hands.
Right, right. So during the course of your career, you must have had interactions with the EPA and the DEC. So how hard is it to report an issue or a problem?
Uh, it's not hard at all. The DC, and I want to say right up front, I've had disagreements with the DEC, but I appreciate the DEC. I want them funded better so that they can do what they want to do better. So anything I say has to be within that. I appreciate the DEC. So, reporting, the DEC has a hotline. EPA has a spill hotline, for example. We've worked with the EPA less than the state regulator. One fun little story is on Newtown Creek, which is a waterway between Brooklyn and Queens across from the United Nations. We've been in there since 2002, and we've taken on big problems like Exxon, and we've taken on local polluters. That's an area where that model I talked about earlier, where bad guy industries, that's been an issue in the New York City byways and side waterways. So we went after a cement plant there because we could see they were flushing their trucks at the end of the day into Newtown Creek. And but we were a little concerned because at the time, if you called up the name of this plant in a Google search, the New York Times was running stories about the owner of the plant being indicted as a mobster. And so we didn't quite know how to handle that. And so we called in an EPA criminal prosecution team. And I'll never forget that boat ride. We were in our regular old boat clothes and our regular old boat. And these men and women showed up in suits and the shades. I called them the green men, like men in black. Well, I called them green men in black. And they were, once we showed them the case, the way they operate is they never talk to you again. You give them your evidence, show them the case, they go away. And if something comes of it, then you hear about it. And in our office, in Riverkeeper's office, I will err by saying our office because I only retired him 2 months ago. In Riverkeeper's office is a photocopy of a big check we received. Half of the penalty was directed to Riverkeeper by the EPA. The DEC we work with a lot more, and we work with their fisheries people to try to help herring and shad and sturgeon and eel. And we work with their habitat people in creating some new, um, you know, um, wildlife protection areas. I'm generalizing. One interesting thing in our relationship, which is worth mentioning, is that years and years ago, all of you in Rockland remember the auto body plant that was in Terrytown, where I grew up. And it closed, it was demolished, it was going to be developed. And of course, there was a request for comments, and we commented. And I was out there with a high level DEC administrator with our team. And he came up to me as we passed General Motors after all the comments, after the permits had been given. And, and he said to me, he came up and he said to me something he would never write, of course. He said to me, John, you guys went too easy on us here. And that was part of my training. You see, that was how I learned. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you only asked us to do this and this and this in the remediation. And I realized our role is critically important, and I say our role in that case, I mean Riverkeeper and all of us, we the public, have to ask for the best. We have to be idealistic. We have to ask for the right thing. We do not compromise ourselves. We do not negotiate our argument down. We let others negotiate down. But what I was being told was that if we'd had a higher bar, the DEC would have required a higher cleanup standard because they would have had somebody pulling them up. And so that it taught me a lot. It taught me don't compromise. It also taught me don't be upset if when you bring your ideas to the DEC, don't be upset if they say, oh, we can't do it. They've heard you. And to whatever extent they can, they're going to do the best they can. But you have to understand the DC commissioner is appointed by the governor. DC is a politically controlled agency. And so they can't be Greenpeace. They can't be Sierra Club. I'll stop there. I could go on another hour on that.
Yeah, that sounds interesting and a huge learning experience for sure. Something we could all take to heart.
It's been borne out again and again and again for me that
Hmm.
that they will never say it in a group setting, but they joined, they took the job at DC, most of them, because they want to make a better world. That's why they picked that job. And so they're looking for allies to help them. And sometimes they can't acknowledge that ally, but they want us to be true. They want us to be idealistic because then because they have to split the difference. They have to split the difference between the best and the worst. And if the best is strong, then they can go closer to that line in their decision making.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds hard in a sense, in one way, because in some ways it seems like you can't play Mr. Nice Guy all the time.
No,
Like
in this business, you have to be willing to make people really mad at you,
hmm.
really mad. And sometimes it's not a violent anger.
Right.
Um, I'll give one example. Back in the early 2000s, there was data showed that the shad population had hit red line. Shad come into the Hudson every spring to spawn. They go back to sea. And we had shad festivals in all our villages, but the population had reached red line. And if you don't have a sufficient population, there can't be enough of a spawning event to sustain that population. And the fisheries people were suggesting a closure. And I remember getting calls saying that, please, John, don't support this shad closure because it'll mean no more shad festivals. It'll mean that wonderful families like the Gabrielsons and Nyack and the DeGroats and Havistraw are going to lose their seasonal fishing. They only fish for a month every spring, but that heritage, that history is going to go away. And it was hard because these are the boat people that I know. This is my
Hmm.
community. And the Everett Knack family, all there's so many families, and this is my people. And I had to think hard. And who are my people now? My people are the shed, actually. That's who I serve.
Hmm.
And we can't continue traditions that the fish can't support. And we have to have the fish. We have to look after them. So I had to go to these meetings where I was the only person in the room saying that they supported the shad closure. The rest of the room would all be fishermen saying boo to this idea. And that was not fun, but it was all respectful. And I communicated why I was there. But so yeah, you can't be afraid of taking unpopular positions. You can't be afraid of having certain people angry at you. You have to know your job. You have to know who you serve. And I served the river.
Got yeah. And kind of on the same line here is what do you think? How's the public awareness about the Hudson River evolved during your career?
Say again, I'm sorry.
How do you think the public is made aware of the issues with the river in the course of your career? Has
Yeah,
the public awareness increased, decreased, stayed the same? I mean, are people
yeah,
aware of
yeah.
what's going on?
I'm happy to report that I think public engagement and awareness and concern for the river, concern is what matters, has gone way up. I don't have a study, I have my life experience, and I can
Hmm.
give you an example. Um, you know, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as XYZ Creek Alliance, as far as I know. Those are communities deciding that the tributary to the Hudson in their community is important. The best example I can come up with is um, some of you will remember in about 2017, there was a request by the tug and barge industry and the merchant marine industry, the commercial carriers that, that run up to Albany in ocean going ships, which you all seen on the Hudson, and the barges, oil barges holding 4 million gallons of product, liquid product. They requested a whole bunch of designated anchorages from the Tappan Zee Bridge all the way up to the Kingston area. And the public concern was that added anchorages will increase commercial traffic. We weren't saying decrease commercial traffic. We were saying the level of commercial traffic is sufficient. Because if you increase the capacity for commercial traffic, you increase the development pressure in the Port of Albany. And we've already seen problems in that area where habitat and shoreline are being taken for industry. And my position is that the river is given enough. No more giving, only healing. So we led an effort to block that request by industry. The Coast Guard was the mediator, and the Coast Guard did a beautiful job. It was a pleasure working with them. There was high integrity and high levels of respectful communication. Um, End of the story is that the proposal was abandoned. But why is the reason I'm telling you this story is to answer your question. The only other anchorage north of the Tappan Zee before this request was at Hyde Park, where the Vanderbilt Mansion is, halfway between Poughkeepsie and Kingston. And that anchorage is called 19 Alpha, or the Hyde Park anchorage. And these ships and barges use it as a place to stage until their berth in Albany is available, or until whatever. They stop there. Now, when the Hyde Park anchorage was proposed and publicly noticed in the late 1990s, went out to public comment, Federal Register, Hudson River, all of us were here. Many of us were here. I never heard a peep. The Coast Guard received 19 public comments, or 17,
Hmm.
less than 20, on an anchorage right in front of the Vanderbilt mansion, in between Hyde Park and West Park. Probably it's sort of like the Fifth Avenue or Central Park West of the valley. There's a lot of money there. And the views, from Hyde Park, you look across the Hudson up to the Catskills. It's billion-dollar views. And so there were 19 comments. Now, fast forward to 2017, when this request for additional anchorages came up. Riverkeeper did an excellent job of advocating for the river. Our communications team, led by Leah Ray, just killed it and engaged the public in a way that I don't recall ever engaging the public before. And the Coast Guard, in the end, received 10,200 comments. 10,000 of those comments were against.
Mm.
The Coast Guard, the Northeast commander of one of the officials from sector Boston, which oversees even the Port of New York, the whole Northeast Coast Guard, said to me, the Coast Guard has never received so many comments on any issue in the history of the Coast Guard. Now, so I was extremely happy that we'd helped the community of the Hudson Valley push back on increased industrialization. But I am as happy, or even more happy, to see that if you message for the river correctly, the public will come forward for the river. 10,000 people. And I'm not saying just individuals, I'm saying mayors. I'm saying some of those signatures were from people representing 500 people or 1,000. We did the math, and that 10,000 represented over 1 million individual persons. And the Coast Guard abandoned the project. So, your question about awareness and caring for the river, I know it's there. And as an environmentalist and as a community member, speaking to you all, we need to communicate to our neighbors and in the valley what the river needs, what the waterways need. And if we communicate well, the public is there. We saw it again with the plan by the company decommissioning Indian Point to release the radioactive water from the spent fuel pools into the Hudson a couple years ago. I believe there were 40,000 comments to Governor Hochul. That's power, man.
Yeah.
So the answer is good news. It's public cares, and the public will stand up.
Yeah, encouraging. Very, very good. Great, great. Hey, in all your time with Riverkeeper, can you share a particular memorable or challenging day?
Well, yeah, there are many.
Hard to pick one out of all your time.
One little event, which is probably going to be interesting to your group, is that when we had Hurricane Sandy, whatever year that was, I had first problem was to preserve the boat, and so I spent the night aboard because I didn't know how the docks would hold up. I didn't know how high the water was going to go. So I was in Ossining at Westerly Marina overnight, and overnight the water, as you all know, went way up.
Mm.
And I was securing boats. I was afraid that some of the boats that were tied up well would break loose, and then that would start a dominoes of dock failure that would affect our boat. But we had no problem overnight. And then of course an opportunity was presented itself. The next morning we learned that all the sewer plants in New York City had been inundated and were shut down. And as some of you know, back in 2008, I started a water quality sampling program, and it grew out to sample tributaries, and now it's in the Mohawk and the Upper Hudson. It's a keystone of Riverkeeper's work. Um, but we've always looked for unusual events where we might learn something about how humankind affects the river. So we thought, oh God, we got to go down and sample New York Harbor. If all the sewer plants are down, so I couldn't move right away because the Coast Guard closed the port of New York, and I couldn't get fuel because the marine fuel docks had all been swamped, so none of the fuel pumps was working. So we finally schlepped fuel from an inland gas station, diesel fuel, down to the boat, and we went down and sampled New York Harbor 3 or 4 days after Sandy. And we were looking for sewage indicators, a microbe called Enterococcus. And we got some Enterococcus, but we've been sampling there a long time. So we knew that, in fact, the counts we were getting after Sandy were low, counterintuitive. So we watched, and a few days later, there was a northeaster, the kind we have all the time, where it blows a little bit, tide's a little high, but it rains for 12 hours. And so we thought, okay, we have Sandy, we have our prior data, let's go back to the city. So we went back and sampled the harbor again. And what we found is that and the plants were back up by then. The plants were running again. So we sampled after Sandy when the plants rolled down. And then we sampled after the northeaster when the plants were back up. And it had rained all night. Now you may recall Sandy was a dry storm. It didn't rain.
Right.
What causes sewers to overflow is the rain inundating the combined sewer system in New York City and in many communities. And so the sewage counts were much higher after the northeaster than after Sandy. The lesson learned is that Sandy, of course, with 10-foot tides, multiple high tides, not to be too coarse, was essentially the tides were flushing the toilet. The Atlantic Ocean is right next door. And then after the northeaster, the tides weren't there to do that flushing. And the chronic overflows of sewage in New York Harbor recontaminated the harbor. New York City is allowed by permit to discharge just under 30 billion gallons a year of street and water and sewage into the river in rain events through about 460 pipes. Some of these pipes are the size of a 2-car garage. So that event, again, every time you go out, you learn. But it was a very interesting sort of compressed week of fighting for the boat's life, and then having the opportunity to learn something really important about how the river deals with human waste.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. So, John, what's next now that you are retired? I mean, I'm looking at you and you're way too young to be sitting in a chair. So I know you've got something up. So what's next on the horizon for John Lipscomb?
Well, I do terribly miss being on the water. So I'm gonna find a way to get back on the water. I loved my time with the Riverkeeper patrol boat. We patrolled. When I put the engine in, my crew and Peterson's put the engine in 2000. In 99, we had 40 hours on the engine after break-in, 40 hours. When I left the boat last fall, it had 17,200 hours. And those hours at a low average speed of 5 knots is the equivalent of 3 circumnavigations of the globe at the equator on the
Wow.
Hudson. And so I was blessed to have that job. I love the boat so much. And so I'm desperate to get back on the water. But I am also, as I'm telling people, I'm retired from Riverkeeper, but I did not retire from the river. And so I've joined with two friends and ex-colleagues from Riverkeeper, Rebecca Martin and Jen Epstein, and they are leading an effort, and I'm going to give you a website, your listeners, a website in just a second. One of the problems I uncovered in 2010 and was never able to pursue, and this is a little complicated, so I'm going to try. When you think of our landfills throughout New York State, some of them are 2 and 3 miles long and 50, 60 stories tall. Some of them are active, receiving material, and some of them are inactive. Some are, like incinerator ash, and some are general municipal waste. Um, what happens in a landfill, even the ones that are closed and capped, is rainwater and snowmelt percolate down through them and create what I call dump tea, dump juice. And if you just imagine for a second everything that's in a landfill, everything that's in a landfill, and then run water through it like you were making tea, it's hard to conceive of a way to pollute water more than to percolate it down through a landfill. So the new landfills have a liner at the bottom and a collection system, and they collect this material called leachate.
Mhm.
And of course, it's way too hot, way too contaminated to discharge into a water body. Clean Water Act, no go.
Right.
So the solution since the Clean Water Act, so going back a half a century and more, has been to collect the leachate, put it in tank trucks, take it to sewer plants, blend it with the sewer plant effluent, and discharge it in the river. Now, sewer plants, the state calls them wastewater treatment plants. Well, they're not. They don't treat wastewater, they treat sewage. The technology in a sewer plant is almost entirely focused on removing solids from wastewater that come from our homes, our bathtubs, our toilets, our sinks, our showers, and then disinfecting that material, and then discharging what I call partially treated effluent. In that effluent, there's still microplastics, there's still antibiotics, there's still all kinds of stuff that is bad for the aquatic life in the river. We have to find a way of living in harmony, and we're not even close.
Mm.
Um, but um, this new project is designed to expose what we're calling the leachate loophole. And in order to engage the public, we limited it. It's a New York State, it's a nationwide issue. But instead of looking at it at the state level, we looked at it at a watershed level, and we decided that the best way to engage the public was to find reaches of the river where people drink the water. So between Poughkeepsie and Kingston, there are 7 communities that drink river water, have for decades. 115 million there. And on the Mohawk, there are communities that drink river water. And so we looked at where is this leachate being taken? And we found that 90 million gallons of leachate is being blended per year in sewer plants that discharge into these reaches of the river where people drink the water. And we want to end that practice, not just where people drink, but into our rivers generally. And so we've mounted an advocacy campaign. We're pushing the DEC to do what's called a rulemaking, where they can change how landfills are required to deal with leachate. Right now, it's a massive source of extremely toxic pollution that is permitted and unknown to the public. So Rebecca and Jen are the core, and I am an unpaid advisor and cheerleader for them and help with messaging. But if any of you are interested, and I urge you to look into this because it is mean, if you think of it, we all get excited when we see uh, um, ABC Industries discharging industrial wastewater from a pipe this big. 90 million gallons just in our project area every year. It's a horrific amount of pollution, legal, under the radar.
Mm,
Public pressure will change it. I'm absolutely confident. So I urge you all to look online at the leachate loophole.org. Leachate loophole.org. And so there's your answer. That's my future. I'm gonna try to work on this issue and help Rebecca and Jen carry it on and win. It's gonna take years. And but I want to focus on that for now.
that sounds like a heavy lift and
It's a good one.
anything. Yeah, yeah, that sounds wow.
It's a really
That's
it's a really good one. It's you know what it goes back to what I was saying earlier. These systemic societal problems are the new frontier. And while we were all out back bashing Exxon and GE and this one and that one, the discrete individual industries for polluting, that was all very good. But none of them was discharging 90 million gallons a year.
right.
So by going after the systemic issues, we're finally getting down to the real meat of it.
Right, right.
Thank you all for letting me bend your ear.
No, that's thank you. And you have to tell Jen Epstein we said hello
I
because
will.
remember the sampling on the Spark Hill Creek with Jen, and I don't she went to where did she went to Africa? Where did she go?
Her husband's a teacher in Tanzania, so she is there, and so our team works via Zoom. We were on
Okay.
we're on yesterday, and we're looking to partner with some other uh, not-for-profit advocacy groups that have slightly different toolboxes and maybe slightly different targets, but our targets overlap. So we're trying to build a coalition. And I believe this is an issue that the public, once informed, will carry to victory.
Yeah, great, great. So once again, it's leachateloophole.com.
.org.
Dot
.org.
org. Okay.
And leachate is LEACHATE. Leachateloophole.org.
Well, that's great. Again, thank you very much, John. This has been
I
very,
have to say this much more.
yep.
If you look at that website, there is a place to take an action. We are asking the public to say to the DC respectfully, please open a rulemaking on leachate. This practice, I was unaware of it. Now that I'm aware of it, I find it intolerable. Please open
Mm,
a rulemaking and do it now so that we can treat leachate at the landfills and not export the pollution. I mean, yeah, there's much more to say, but that's enough.
yeah, well, great. Thanks a lot. We'll look up this website and see what we can do. See if we can and help the cause. But at this point, would like to open it up to anybody that's got any questions. Anybody got any questions for John? Thought I thought I
Yes,
saw.
Matt, we had a question in the chat. I'll just read it out. It's from Elizabeth from Planning. She said, what are your thoughts on the recent Supreme Court ruling which weakened rules on discharge of raw sewage into water supplies?
Yeah, I saw that, and I communicated with our team, and I don't fully understand that. I don't understand how San Francisco would be fighting the EPA on an environmental issue. That's the case you're referring to, I think, a San Francisco case. And I haven't had time to really look into it. I obviously don't think we should relax our rules on discharging contaminants of any kind, sewage and other. So I'm mystified and haven't had time to really get into it. But again, a blanket response is any weakening of anti-pollution laws is nuts because we haven't achieved clean water. We did a study with Cornell because we were sampling every month. I would offer the boat to researchers, and they had a budget to do lab analysis, but they didn't have a budget to hire a boat. So we would take samples. So with Cornell, I think we did a couple of transits. This is 10 years ago, maybe, where we looked at about 170 pharmaceuticals and beauty care products. The stuff that you either ingest and pass or put on your skin and wash off. And it ends up going to the sewer plant. Sewer plant, as you now know, can't deal with that. It deals with bacteria. And so all this stuff goes in the water. And the question was, how much is there? And we found every single one in measurable amounts in the Hudson throughout the entire Hudson. So we certainly don't need weaker laws. We need stronger laws.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We had one other question too that had come up.
And I've got to say this. I've got to say this is part of it because immediately comes to mind, well, if we have higher restrictions, it's going to cost more to treat the sewage. Yes. But first, 2 points. First, we don't own the river. So fouling its body, fouling its habitat is not one of our privileges. The second is that the Hudson Valley is enormously valuable as a resource for real estate, for tourism, for recreation, billions and billions of dollars. Imagine if people weren't afraid to swim. So a clean environment is good for business. You can't just look at the cost of a cleaner environment. You have to look at the benefit, and we know that a cleaner environment is cost effective.
Yes, we need to. The cure is for sure. That's we need to have clean water.
Healthy water, healthy for the creatures that live in it, and clean for us. The Clean Water Act was kind of a failed first attempt, to be honest. It said that the water should be swimmable, fishable, and drinkable. If you think about it, if you stand back from that, you realize that the criteria for the water were all human use. We can fish it, we can swim in it, we can drink it. Not the only creatures on the freaking planet here, And so we ought to have a Clean Water Act next generation, which says that the river should be swimmable, drinkable, fishable, and healthy for aquatic life and support aquatic life in abundance. Then we will have gotten there.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Hey, we had a question too regarding the wild bird flu or sick birds. If you come across any sick birds, or would you have to go to the DEC for the bird flu, or maybe a fish kill? Maybe you found fish kills at one point in time.
Yeah, so fish first. We saw, I can't keep the years separate, but there were a couple of years where we had extremely warm, dry periods, hot, dry periods in the summer. And we had in the lower estuary, we had menhaden, or they're referred to as bunker. They're a migratory fish like shad or herring. They're a filter feeder. They filter plankton through their gills. And they were dying all over the place. I mean, millions and millions and millions. It was very distressing. We were getting photos from the harbor up until the highlands. And it turned out, after analysis, to be an infection of a Vibrio, which I believe is a virus, and it's related to overnutrification and sewage.
Mm.
And it was at the die-off was aggravated by the fact that these hot, dry periods, when the river water gets hotter, dissolved oxygen goes down. And as plankton eat plankton, which love the sun, eat some of the nutrients in the water, which again, a lot of the nutrients are from sewer plants. Sewer plants don't all, depending on the sophistication of the plant. So it's like a fertilizer jet into the river. So the plankton, use too much oxygen. So a lot of these fish were basically suffocating. And then Vibrio was a disease that attacked them because they were compromised. But I'm not a biologist, so that could be 50% wrong. But I know there were 2 years where we had a big bunker die off. Now, as far as birds, bird flu was a part of the conversation through last year for me. And I've not seen any, but I've had some fun events with birds where I can think of 3 right off the top of my head. Up near the Port of Albany, I was headed south, passing a marina where I couldn't go fast, and 200 yards ahead of me, a bald eagle dropped in the water to get a fish. And usually they grab the fish off the surface and then they're off. Unlike an osprey, which dives in. Well, this eagle dropped right in the water, and they don't have oily feathers. And I'm looking at this, and I'm constrained because I've got 200 yards. I can't go fast. I can't make a wake. And this eagle's in the water, and I'm thinking, eagle's going to get waterlogged, and I got to get there. And so I finally got past the marina, and I rushed down on him, and he immediately let go of whatever fish he was holding and flew away. So to fake out. And I've learned since that if they get a big enough fish that they can't lift it, they will actually, and this eagle was doing that, they take their wings and they do a breaststroke for shore. And if you go on YouTube and look at bald eagle swimming, you're going to see it. So that was cool. I had an osprey get caught in the rigging of a sailboat at the marina, and I only noticed it because I saw the shadow of the boat on deck while I was doing an oil change one Saturday. And I look up, and this osprey is jammed in between some wires. And I swear I almost had a heart attack. I was so stressed for this bird. And I made a long, long pole and put a tennis ball on the top. And I got the tennis ball under his belly and pushed him up so that he got out of the V between the rigging and flew off. And then we had, little birds that were chased down by a crow up at Peekskill once, and I scooped the little bird out. I'm not a bird guy. There's little birds, big birds. It's a little like a chickadee. And I put him, he was soaking wet, and the gulls were about to get him. He was this close to being bird food. And I put him in a bucket with some rags. I took him back to Peterson's boatyard where I was berthed at the time. And when we got to the dock, he looked out the side of the wheelhouse and he said, "Land ho," and he flew away. And there are lots of stories like that. So we've had some very fun interactions with birds where we happen to be at the right place at the right time to help them. And that, of course, is a joyful thing.
Great. Nice. Yeah, that's very rewarding.
Yeah,
Gives you a good feeling.
I bet it does.
Oh, does anybody else have any comments or questions for John? Feel free to unmute your mic if you'd like. However, well, John, I don't see anything. Brianna, I don't know if you see anything, but again, I would really like to thank you for an enjoyable conversation. We certainly wish you the best of luck moving forward in all of your new endeavors. And we'll definitely check out the leachateloophole.org
Great.
and see what we can do along those lines. But yeah, that opens up a whole nother issue that I had never thought of, to be honest with you. So
nobody knows about it. I first learned about it from the Croton Point landfill. They're a capped landfill. They generate 20,000 gallons a day. And Riverkeeper busted them in the 90s for discharging it right next to the beach at Croton Point where people swim. And as part of the settlement, they said, okay, well, we're gonna take it in tank trucks and take it away for treatment. And then I finally realized, what is treatment? What is treatment? The word treatment to us sounds like it's going to be done right. But when I learned that treatment was just taking it to the sewer plant right next to Riverkeeper's office in Ossining and discharging it in the river. So here we are fighting like hell for healthy fish, and right under our noses, 20,000 gallons a day of very, very polluted water. So you know, the name of the game is as you work in this business, as you get involved in river health, you learn the river can't talk. The river could talk, it'd be a different game, but the river can't speak, so it just waits for us to understand what it needs and to do the right thing.
Yes, for sure. And it needs help. So,
Appreciate the invitation very much.
oh, you're welcome. You're
Thank you.
welcome. Let me see here. Oh, we had a little follow-up from Elizabeth. The Supreme Court basically said that the EPA is unable to include end result provisions on permits that allow municipalities to discharge overflow of raw sewage that occurs during heavy rainstorms.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that same thing, and I you know, so I don't know enough. I mean, I don't know enough to have a strong opinion. I don't think, don't come after me for saying this. I don't know I haven't read what the law was, but
Mm-hmm.
just based on that one sentence, if San Francisco was being told to do something and being held responsible for the final health of San Francisco Bay, if the health of San Francisco Bay was all being put on San Francisco, I'm not sure that that's actually fair because San Francisco is certainly not the only source of pollution. But I don't want to I don't want to say more because I haven't studied it. But
Okay. Yep. Fair enough.
it's a peculiar case and needs more research.
Well, great. Thanks again. You're welcome to,
My pleasure.
yeah, you're welcome to stay on. We've got, see what we've got for old business, and I can give you a quick update on our treasurer's report.